It's time once again for a brand new discussion topic on Two Women Talking. It is I, Tomboy, Leanna Kersner, and Song WXen, Girly Girl. Why did I say Erickson? Erickson. There we go, off to a great start. And we are talking this time about a listener submitted topic. Yes, you can sponsor a topic on Two Women Talking. Get in touch. This listener, viewer, depending on the medium you're accessing in, wanted us to talk about the Queen Commander archetype. Basically, any woman who fits a role in the society and or institution that is recognized as holding power. So that's what the listener wanted us to talk about. And he specifically asked for a character from Conan, which songs you are the expert on. So let's start there. Specifically mentioned Yasmela from the Conan the Barbarian universe.
Yes, he asked for Yasmela from the story Black Colossus.
Mm-hmm.
So Yasmela is, I can never remember the name of her kingdom. I think
Yasmela's kingdom.
Yes. So Yasmela is a princess. She is the younger sister of the current ruling king. However, her brother has been captured and is being held hostage by the king of Ophir, and he hasn't decided yet if he wants to ransom him or hand him over to another enemy. And we never get a resolution for that story. But the whole thing is just a setup to put Yasmela in the situation of power. It's interesting because no one really questions her authority, which is kind of nice. People are always talking about, oh, the Conan stories are so sexist because half-naked girls. Nope. But so Yasmela is currently under spiritual attack by the big bad, who is an evil sorcerer who has been released from his tomb after 3,000 years, and he has chosen Yasmela as his consort. And so he's appearing to her at night in her dreams, telling her, you have been marked as mine, yada yada. And the priests of Ishtar, they're not doing anything for her. Their charm isn't protecting her anything. So one of her handmaids says, okay, let's go to the temple of Mitra. Mm-hmm. I know you guys haven't worshipped him in a long time, but nothing else is working. Let's try Mitra. So she goes into the temple of Mitra and is told to go into the city, and the first man you see, give him control of your armies. First man she sees is Conan.
Yep.
And so yada yada, things go from there. She travels out with the army when Conan leads them. Conan is able to completely break the much larger ranks, of course, but she gets kidnapped by the evil sorcerer. It's a Conan story. Conan comes in, rescues her, pretty much ends with them having sex in a cave.
This is the first story Conan had any real leadership role, wasn't it?
I don't know if it wasn't the first published story,
okay.
But because the first story that was ever actually published, he was already king. And I've had some people say that was actually a turnoff, because they were like, well, then there's no stakes in any of the future stories. But it is said in story that it's the first time he's led anything more than a band of thieves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it was the first time he was given the position of general. And at one point, one of his companions does say, you wear your regalia with more nobility than some kings. And, it said that when he does become a king, those are words that come back to him.
Mm-hmm. So, and I mean, she's going to be an important figure in a story about Conan learning to be a leader.
I mean, she never shows up again in any of the stories.
Yeah.
Well, that's not entirely true. I believe. So for anyone who's only vaguely aware of Conan and has heard me go, fuck Elsbrog de Camp, let me explain why really quick. So Elsbrog de Camp yes, he is credited with kind of preserving Howard's legacy and that he kept the stories in the public consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
However, he had a tendency to go in and rewrite Howard's stories as he saw fit. However, he was a much inferior writer.
Ooh.
And then he would start going through and writing sequels and his own stories that had absolutely none of Howard's material. And Robert E. Howard was a brilliant writer, absolutely incredible, especially for the pulps in the 30s.
Mm-hmm.
And DeCamp just was not. So he did do a sequel where Yasmela showed up. And basically, Conan is annoyed that she can't give him more time. So she says, well, you know, if we were to rescue my brother, I wouldn't have these affairs of state to deal with, so we could spend more time together. So Conan goes, rescues her brother, but by the time he's done, he's like, I'm bored of her anyway.
Oh.
And I'm like, fuck you, DeCamp.
Yeah, that's the difficult thing about passing of the torch that way.
Yeah.
Is you get those sour notes and then, well,
and it's like, here's the thing. When Lovecraft passed away, we did have people who followed up his stories.
right.
One, even they're credited as not being as good as Lovecraft, of course, and messing with the timeline.
Mm-hmm.
But one, that was actually a friend of Lovecraft's who had known him. DeCamp did not know Howard. They had no connection. He was just a fan.
Right.
And two, the Lovecraft mythos had always been a shared sandbox for Lovecraft and his friends. Like, even the Lovecraft mythos is a part of the Conan mythos.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, yes, Lovecraft is the name, but the bulk of the timeline is actually Howard's, because he's the one who has the fall of Atlantis leading to, from Cole of Atlantis, Conan the Barbarian, which eventually leads to Bran Mak Morn, the Pict ruler, and then Solomon Kane. And I did a Twitter thread breakdown once of how you can prove all these characters take place in the same universe.
Oh, that's cool.
And then how it connects to the Lovecraft, the Cthulhu mythos, because there's mentions of Bran Mak Morn and even Conan, and I think even possibly Kull in the Cthulhu mythos. So yeah, it's all woven together. So it's like bulk of the timeline technically belongs to Howard, but we still call it the Cthulhu mythos. So, but yes, so there we go. As we said, this is my wheelhouse.
Yeah. So, and that, I mean, for people, it's a short story. So if people wanted to read it, it's not a big commitment. The Black Colossus.
I think it was like an hour and a half, and 40 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've got, I mean,
you can also, you can find the audiobook for free on YouTube.
Oh, awesome. There you go.
Yeah.
So you were saying earlier that people tend to dismiss the women in Conan because the whole scantily clad thing. I actually use them in my university lecture when I talk about, what I call the He-Man and She-Ra test. That it's okay to have scantily clad women as long as they don't look significantly more naked than men in your universe in the same role. And I actually use Conan and Red Sonja in that part of the talk.
So interestingly, the books do not have Conan naked. Like, the loincloth is purely a Frank Frazetta creation.
Yeah.
But there is a reason why Howard did these scantily clad girls, and part of that is because most of his stories were published in a pulp magazine called Weird Tales.
Yeah.
And Weird Tales, they wanted a scandalous cover that would get people's attention. So they wanted a naked girl in distress, pretty much. And Lovecraft described Howard's writing as better than any money-making scheme he could concoct. Which basically meant even when he was tailoring his writing to what Weird Tales wanted to try and get as much money as he could, even then he died with them owing him $30, which back in the 30s was a big deal. So his writing overcame any of that in most cases. A few of the stories get a bit repetitive when you read them all, but
Mm-hmm.
whatever.
Yeah.
But so what it was if you had a story with a scantily clad girl in distress, and especially if you could add some sexual elements to it,
Mm-hmm.
then Weird Tales was more likely to choose that to then commission an artist for the cover
Right.
to feature that this a scene from that story.
Mm-hmm.
So Howard had his naked girls because that made it more likely that he would get the cover story, and that way he would get paid more.
This is why it's so strange when you hear people going, remember when things were simpler? Remember when women were modest? And I mean, that was the 1920s, right? 1920s, 1930s.
The 30s, yeah.
Yeah, the 30s. Well, Weird Tales started in the 20s, I think.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, you look at the stuff that was published back then, and it's way racier. I mean, part of the problem with the John Carter stories, the Barsoom stories, is that they, for the movie, they had to totally change Deja Thoris's costume.
For anyone who doesn't know, Deja Thoris doesn't have a costume.
Well, she has jewelry.
Yes, but
that's technically a costume.
But I mean, Barsoom was basically designed to be a kind of Eden in a way, because no one wears clothes. It's
right.
weird to call it an Eden because Barsoom is actively dying. Oh.
Yeah, but it was there was a thing at the time where these escapist fantasies, because Weird Tales was absolutely just take you away from your troubles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was the 30s. Yeah. Times were tough, and it was, post World War One. People just wanted absolute escapism, and the fact that we had this explosion of wise queens, yes, naked wise queens, but there is that sort of, I mean, yes, Mella's definitely got a mystic element to her, right? Go to the temple, do what he says, kind of thing.
And the god does speak to her. I don't know if I was clear about that. Like, straight up, Mitra's like, no need to tell me what's wrong, honey. Here's what you do.
Well, isn't that actually the cover? The statue of Mitra?
Probably.
Yeah. The naked lady on the cover is actually a deity in that world. But that's the nudge winks they did back then were pretty great as far as I'm concerned. And it was the way you set up the conditions that these guys were writing in, I think is important, because I think it's a mistake to look at the ways that from a modern perspective, it's minimizing or demeaning women. Thinking about the aspirations that these writers had for women in their stories. I mean, you can argue they were sort of trophies, but it's certainly not the cut and dried Bond girl dynamic. Conan doesn't. What do you think of the whole thing of him getting with Yasmela at the end?
I mean, it's pretty clear that the stories don't have there isn't really a purity culture anywhere in the Hyborian age. There is an element of she's the prize to it, but at the same time, pretty much all the girls in Conan's stories are well-rounded characters.
Yeah.
In the novel House of the Dragon, and honestly, I feel like not House, Hour of the Dragon.
I was going to ask about that. Okay, yeah.
Honestly, I feel like if you wanted to talk about powerful Conan girls, there is I believe she's a duchess in the Hour of the Dragon novel, which was the only novel-length story Howard wrote for Conan. There's a duchess who Conan never sleeps with her. They never even flirt, but she is a member of his court after he becomes king of Aquilonia, and she is loyal to him. and she resists the usurper who has tried to overthrow him, and she helps him get back to his throne. There's also a witch with a wolf familiar who, and these are pretty much two of the people who are credited with getting him back on the throne, as well as that's the story that introduces Zenobia, his future wife, who he meets her when he's been imprisoned by, I believe, the king of Nemedia. And she's a member of the king's harem, but she comes into his prison. She brings him a knife. She shows him the way out. She gives him a horse, and he's impressed with the quality of both. But like, oh, she didn't give me some tiny little needle dagger. She got me an actual knife, and she got me a horse I can ride. So she wins his respect, and in the end, the last line of the story is he defeats the king and says, "There's a woman in your harem named Zenobia. I demand her as part of your surrender. She was a slave in Nemedia. I will make her queen in Aquilonia." So Zenobia's my favorite Conan girl.
Now, I mean, the interesting thing about Robert E. Howard is his relationship to violence in his real world. You know, he's the son of a doctor. So he got to see, you know, the after effects of farm accidents and things like that. So the fact that he created this kind of beautiful world completely juxtaposed with his reality of seeing, you know, some of those accidents during the oil boom were pretty grisly.
Yeah.
So I always find that interesting. English Lit, I always got spanked for using author biography to inform the text, but I don't care. I think it's important, right? Because when we look at intent, and again, you know, deconstruction, postmodernism doesn't like bringing an author intent, but I don't think that's right. I think that we need to, if we're going to criticize depictions of women, we have to give benefit of the doubt regarding intent. And this was an era where people were kind of waking up to the fact that women could do stuff, not only because of the contributions to World War I, but also, you know, the American population was starting to migrate quite a bit. Well, it always did. Yeah. But, you know, the moving around and the establishing the home that women did, that influenced a lot of these heroines.
And Howard lived in Texas.
Yeah.
So it, unlike, I love the contrast between Lovecraft and Howard were really close friends, which is part of why I always compare and contrast them. But, you know, Lovecraft, very much that New England, wet, murky kind of horror, whereas Howard's is filled with reptiles and evil snakes and dry rot and deserts and stuff like that. So it's amazing to see what they do with those different elements, in even when they're writing the same kind of cosmic fantasy that's set in the same universe and using the same kind of monsters. It's still very different, which comes back to what you were saying of using author biography to influence it, because when you know Howard was from Texas, Lovecraft was from New England,
right?
You get this new understanding of why their writing is what it is.
Yeah, and
you see how their environment affected their sense of horror.
Yeah, and I think that to completely ignore that and to just assume the worst is not fair, and it doesn't get a good analysis of what these, I mean, these queens or princesses in these stories were designed to sell books. And you know, that's crapped on by some analysts of, oh, you're objectifying women, but considering we've just shaken off well, some people still believe it, but most people don't believe that, you know, movies with female leads don't sell. Boys don't want to read books about girls. Female video game characters aren't as popular. if you look at what these guys were doing and putting on covers unfettered when people could just do whatever they want, we didn't have, morality restrictions in the same way.
Mhm.
Girls on covers sold books.
Yeah.
And that's why I find this stuff why I love talking to people about this stuff, especially people with different perspectives, because the sponsor of this episode, the fact that he picked that character, we're both like, and I love hearing about waifus. I do. I love hearing about waifus. I love hearing about characters that guys feel this intense closeness with, because it is, right? It's an emotional attachment.
Yeah. Well, it's like after listening to Black Colossus yesterday,
Yeah.
I made a tweet where I said,
Yeah.
sorry, this is going to date this a bit, but I said, I had a realization about Conan girls. It's Belit is the toxic power fantasy. She's the pirate queen who's happy to kill anyone to get treasure and who tries to bend the entire pantheon to make sure that the god Conan likes from this one country is technically still a part of the gods she worships, because the world has to turn the way she wants. Toxic power fantasy, love her, but toxic. Zenobia is who I would want to be, with that ability to win Conan's respect and love in the way I described. Yasmela is who I would probably be, which is, I can't do much, but I can give you control of my armies. Please save us.
Well, that's the thing I wanted to drill down on the whole girl boss, as I jokingly labeled this recording, or Queen Commander archetype, is that is institutional power. And so often in modern media, the only type of leader that people recognize is a person running around with some sort of sword or blaster or both.
I'm so tired of it.
Oh, but that's also not institutional or structural power. That's
not
brute force
power.
Yeah. And the thing about Conan, the thing about even some of Edgar Rice Burroughs stuff, is these queens in the real world have influence often more than power. These women could just hand Conan an army. They didn't have to persuade a male. They could just give it to him.
And like Yasmela does get pushback from the male council, but it's basically she tells him to fuck off.
Yeah, and she's empowered to do that. And I think that's something that when we talk about the typical ones, Game of Thrones is one everybody knows, but even like compare a character like Cersei Lannister to the much more pulp inspired Leia Organa. The fact we're not allowed to call her princess anymore, we have to call her general, but that's a demotion.
Oh God, I think I've talked about this on a previous episode. If not, I've talked to you about it. Just 2017, when I saw after Wonder Woman came out, especially, and it's like General Antiope of the Amazons is played by the actress who played Buttercup in The Princess Bride. So I kept seeing people being like, the girls we looked up to as princesses when we were young have grown up to become generals. That's not a promotion.
Well, but also she was also in House of Cards. What does that say? And I mean, Leia was a senator as well. I mean, the fact that they go with general, the fact that the only power people recognize is the ability to kill someone directly. That's pretty messed up. And one of the other characters the sponsor mentioned was Anya Stroud from Gears of War. And most people dismissed Anya as just sort of a helper girl, kind of like a Cortana. Because this is the fun thing about its interdisciplinary postmodern approaches, they cherry pick what they're going to do. It's structural, or the function in the story. When it looks bad for a female character, it's based on their institutional power. When it looks bad for the female character. And Anya in Gears of War actually outranks the main character, Marcus Phoenix. Marcus is only a sergeant. Anya's a lieutenant or lieutenant, as we say in the Commonwealth.
Mhm.
And that struck me because every time I tried to bring up Anya when Gears was in its heyday, people would roll their eyes and dismiss her as just sort of a helper. But when you actually realize, no, the things she was telling them were orders.
Mhm.
They weren't requests. And that makes a huge difference because if you look at Cersei Lannister, Cersei was scheming the way she was because she had no real power.
Mhm.
She could just be bounced out at any minute because Westeros was incredibly patriarchal. And the reason the the reason the paternity of her children was so important is because, well, who their father was mattered, who their mother was never did. And I always thought that was dumb. I don't know how societies became dominant with that because Jewish ancestry is matriarchal because
Mhm.
that's the part about. Like,
Yeah.
okay, what woman that baby came from. The father, well, maybe not so much.
And it's interesting because it's interesting that, we had this idea, or we had this topic. Now, I've mentioned before, one of my favorite shows is a British Roman period piece called Domina,
Mm-hmm.
which is about the life of Livia Drusilla, the
Mm-hmm.
wife of Emperor Augustus, who was the adopted son slash successor to Julius Caesar. Okay, now that I have everyone's attention because I
Right.
mentioned Julius Caesar,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, so Livia Drusilla is the show. The show does up her influence.
Yes.
There is the interesting thing with Rome is basically you can't trust anything the Romans wrote about themselves, but you
Yeah.
also can't trust anything Rome's enemies wrote about
That's
them.
right. That's right.
And everyone was Rome's enemy, so you can't really trust anything
Right.
anyone has to say about
Right.
ancient Rome.
Yeah.
So there are stories that Livia had a tendency to poison anyone who got in her way. And for me, I find that fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's Cersei Lannister if Cersei had a clue what she was doing
Right. Yeah.
in a way. But uh she, despite the fact that Augustus did have children, I don't think he ever had a son. His first wife gave him a daughter. I don't think he had a son, not legitimately that we know about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Livia was not able to give him any children. However, he was succeeded by her son from her previous marriage, Tiberius, which was
Mm-hmm.
probably a terrible idea because Tiberius was awful. Um, but the thing is, we do know, and it is confirmed, that she was her husband's advisor. Now,
Mm-hmm.
whether she poisoned people to get him on the throne, and whether she was a big part of the manipulation and schemes, we don't know. However, what we do know is that Augustus would make lists of things to talk to her about, whether it was things that came up in the Senate, social issues, whatever. And while he talked to her, he would take detailed notes
Mm-hmm.
about her answers. This is a woman who, whether or not she had power, actual power in the very patriarchal Rome, we can't really say
Mm-hmm.
because the records are so mixed, especially since Tiberius hated her guts and pretty much tried to have her erased and even denied her the honors that
Yeah.
Augustus
Yeah.
had given her. It wasn't until I believe her grandson took over that he reinstated her
Yeah. Yeah.
as the divine mother of Rome.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that she did have influence. She did have that soft power
Yeah.
that we talk about. And especially, like I said, Rome was extremely patriarchal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because so somehow I missed that there was a season 2 for this show.
Oh.
I watched season 1 back when it came out, and it was only just like last week that I found out, oh, there's a season 2 and it's already completely out. So I spent a couple days just binging that.
Oh, awesome.
And I made the mistake of going to look at the reviews, and one, someone was complaining, why are all the powerful characters all white? Don't you know Rome was diverse? Yes, Rome was diverse, but that doesn't mean that the people in power weren't extremely xenophobic. So the people in
Y-
power were pretty much all white.
Yeah, that
It, it,
that
it's
was yeah, there were things about that.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so it's like the cast of the show overall is fairly diverse. But it's like, yeah, no, the people in power, they were white Italians.
Yeah.
Sorry, Rome wasn't that diverse.
Yeah, I mean they were because the whole it's interesting because those cultures, Greece, Rome, they had really what we would consider alien attitudes towards population control.
Mhm.
They were hardcore about that stuff.
Yeah.
So, they didn't terribly care as long as a child was useful. They didn't
Mhm.
terribly care if they were biologically related. The
Yeah,
adoptions happened all the time.
yeah. And like
But
I said, Augustus was adopted by Julius Caesar. Tiberius was adopted by Augustus.
well, yeah,
Augustus was Julius's nephew, but
right.
like I said, Tiberius was Augustus, or he was Augustus's stepson from
Yeah.
Livia's first
But if
marriage.
if someone looked obviously different, it
Mm-hmm.
was, pretty clear dad wasn't local.
Mm-hmm.
And that was seen as a threat because then you've got someone who might be sympathetic to your enemies.
Yeah, and like it's one. I mean, look at the Battle of Teutoburg Forest,
Yeah.
which a few people have noticed that part of the history in Calidus Chronicles was very clearly inspired by Teutoburg Forest, where it's
Oh,
like
cool.
you had the ward of an emperor who returned to his family, decided he hated
Mm.
Rome, and
Yeah.
led one of the most brutal battles in history against the Roman forces.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and the other thing I want to mention, just because I talked to you about this, but it's
Hmm.
just so stupid. I have to bring it up. When I was looking at the reviews for Domina, there was one that said, women need to realize that stories like this about women who have power and influence is shaming women for not being successful and not overcoming abuse and oppression nowadays.
And I do not know how they get that from that. I guess they don't know how it ends.
I mean, it just I'm pretty sure they don't, but like it wasn't even just talking about Domina, it was just talking about stories in general. And I'm so baffled. Like, so stories of powerful women are a tool of the patriarchy to make women feel bad for not being powerful.
That I think is the whole problem we have now with the way the stories are received, though. People start from a position of this makes me feel good, this makes me feel bad. And they don't overcome that to go, well, why does it make me feel bad? And
Mm-hmm.
is there, am I reacting to something that's there? Or is this just reminding me that my own life sucks? And I struggle with this all the time. And I mean, I have an issue with the whole girl boss thing in modern Star Wars is so bad for it
Mm-hmm.
that these women just fuck up and in some cases get other people killed, in some cases risk the security of the entire galaxy. But because there's this protagonist bias, or at least, fairly main character bias, people just like, yeah, I will serve you. You have my sword. That this is her destiny, all that stuff. And that is not the way it works in our world.
Well, it's like, look at I'm going here. Look at The Last Jedi and Admiral Holdo, the purple haired lady.
Right, Laura Dern's character.
And the fact she refuses to tell anyone her plan.
Yeah.
And she just expects complete obedience. And like this was something that pissed a lot of people off,
In
was just that
in a rebellion.
it made no sense.
Yeah.
Like it's one thing to have need to know information, but
Yeah.
when your people are literally at this point sitting ducks
Yeah.
and they're scared, what did you expect? Of course there's going to be a
Of course.
mutiny.
Yeah, of
Of course
course.
they're going to try and do something to protect themselves.
Yeah.
Like it was just such poor leadership, but then she gets to be the martyr and she gets to be the hero. And oh no, she was right all along. And then the actress was like, oh yeah, I have this head canon. Didn't use that word, but I think she was force sensitive. Fuck off. There's a reason no one liked your character.
That's
Because
kind of interesting because I mean now there, and this is why I think Star Wars should have stayed in its sort of space opera roots and
oh
not
yeah.
tried to say something about today, because the more they try to do it, the worse it gets. Leia was a straight up combination kind of Japanese princess, through the Kurosawa route, and then just, Flash Gordon, Edgar Rice Burroughs, Conan the Barbarian kind of thing. She was definitely a throwback to those roots. The thing about those is, in the 1930s, the minute you had women not wearing very much, you knew you were in a completely alien society.
Yeah.
This is not civilized Europe or, immigrant North America. I'm trying to use sort of neutral terminologies for this stuff, because apparently Burroughs was also inspired by his interactions with the indigenous people when he was on the frontier.
Yeah.
And so the minute you get the naked lady, that is an indication this is not our world. And the extrapolation of that to me is, kind of expanding the beauty standard as opposed to making every Star Wars girl look like Leia somehow. That was so weird to me, but I'm getting off topic there. The fact that these old pulps instantly establish this is not our world, this is not our planet, this is not our rules, allowed a speculation of what could be. Not the confines that women were living in at the time in the real world. It was, well, this is they had faith in women's ability to do stuff, to outwit the bad guys, to get, to have wisdom, manifested through, divination and things like that. And obviously all these things are metaphors, right? They were trying to explore a uniquely feminine power through kind of a performative thing of, Yasmela doesn't have Conan's abilities. She doesn't have Conan's raw strength, doesn't have that. She has other things. And I very much enjoy that, as opposed to everybody running around with, Beskar armor and lightsabers and blasters. There's only one type of power now.
And it's brute force.
And it's brute force, and it's quite frankly recklessness. It's so frustrating. You haven't seen Ahsoka, have you?
No.
It's so frustrating because there are parts of that show that absolutely sing. Rosario Dawson's so good. She's not in it nearly enough. But there's
ironic.
It's so weird. Like, there are entire episodes she's not in and her name's on the show. I don't know why Disney keeps doing it. It's like they've got this spreadsheet of, okay, so we've got this show, And then we've got, I think Loki season 2 is coming out October 5th. Oh my fucking God. I still don't know if I'm going to watch that. But I probably will end up doing it just out of morbid curiosity, but I may wait till it's all out so I can strap myself down and just power through it.
That's kind of my plan for Ahsoka. Like,
you know what? It's a better way to watch it because there are parts of it. She is incredible.
mm-hmm.
And the way they are showing a more mature version of her character. But the other Rebels characters, well, she was more of a Clone Wars character than a Rebels character. But the other characters from the cartoons
Mm-hmm.
just seem to have been trapped in amber for the, what is it, 15 years between the end of those shows and the end of the Mandalorian universe takes place after Jedi, right? Yeah.
5 years after Jedi.
5 years after Jedi. Yeah. So a lot of the other characters, they don't seem to have done anything with their lives. It unlike what they did with Picard in season 3, where you actually felt like the next gen characters had lives in the ensuing time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another, I think it's a real problem trying to do stories about female leaders that reflect our reality, because the realities are actually quite depressing and frustrating. And so you've got people trying to show the right things and do the right things instead of honestly talking about what female leadership is like, because it ain't pretty.
Mm-mm.
And there's absolutely no way around it. I mean, I can't even say the names. I can't think of any female politician, for instance. I mean, that's the greatest form of power you can have, right? Other than riches.
Mm-hmm.
But even it's very hard to find a female celebrity that doesn't risk a strong negative reaction from someone. It's very hard to name a woman in government that doesn't elicit a strong visceral negative reaction in someone. You can't even mention Mother Teresa without someone dropping the word fascist.
I hadn't even thought of fascist, but I believe there's also, it's been revealed that she was fraudulent.
Oh, she did some fucked up shit.
Yeah.
But we seem to associate virtuous leaders with inertness and victimhood. And everybody else is a bitch. Everybody else is dishonest, duplicitous. I hate her. She's awful. And, not deserving of love or companionship unless they are perfect, right?
I mean, I think part of that does come down to how divided the party lines are right now in politics.
It's like that they also really leaned on these women, the older ones, when they were coming up. They're I mean, all through the 80s, well, 70s, 80s, and 90s, the whole thing was a woman is too weak to send men to war. And so if there's a woman leader, she'll just let the Russians or the Germans or the Nazis, not all Germans, not all Russians.
Okay, really quick. Did Elizabeth I have any issue sending her men into battle?
Okay, they don't know from that though. Like, let's face it, people don't know history. They don't know about Eleanor of Aquitaine. They don't know about Elizabeth of Spain. Isabella of Spain. They don't know about Catherine the Great. They know about Catherine the Great and the horse. That's about it.
For anyone who doesn't know, Isabel of Spain was the one who pretty much started the Spanish Inquisition.
Right, exactly. So,
her granddaughter was briefly Queen of England and was known as Mary Bloody Mary because she killed, not personally, but she led I don't remember what it's called. She tried to instill Catholicism back in England after Henry VIII did the Church of England.
Yeah.
What was it, like 600 people?
Yeah.
Were killed under Mary?
Yeah.
leadership. Yeah. Uh
Yeah, the
women
I
don't have a problem killing.
yeah, the idea, but I remember watching all the news analysis at the time, and it was, Hillary Clinton had to be a war hawk. Kamala Harris had to be tough on crime. They had to do these things. It was considered essential to prove their strength. Of course, what are the major criticisms of these women now? That they're too ruthless, that they're duplicitous, that they got people killed, that they're warmongers, that they were, they threw so many people in jail. Kamala Harris was a bad DA. And whatever you think about these women, people are allowed their opinions. I don't want to say that. I'm just saying that some of those decisions were seen as the only ones to make at the time. And I think it's very, very important to study this stuff, because I've had that thing where you have to do this and you have to do that. You have to make people like you. You have to say this. You have to follow this opinion. And I look at history and I look at stuff like that and go, these people telling me I have to do this stuff now will not back me up when the consequences show up. This is what history teaches. And so I make very determined decisions to have those fights early. This is the philosophy of what we're doing. These are the first principles of what we're doing. This is what, and we're going to stick to that. And when stuff gets tough, we better have a damn good reason for changing course, because you have to gets extremely powerful. And then, women are so thrown under the bus when it's not intent, because we don't know a lot of the intents. No one asks. People just assume, right? I don't know if you saw the latest Lizzo stuff, that now a wardrobe person who never even met Lizzo in person is accusing Lizzo of a toxic environment because of something a wardrobe person did. And let me tell you, you are deaf and blind on productions like that. You have no idea what some of your employers are doing, because they tell people not to talk to the head talent, and then the head talent gets blamed.
Yeah.
And that's why there need to be what would be advisors in a royal court with these celebrities. Now, of course, then a lot of those advisors turn out to be scumbags. And I think that's what happened with Lizzo. I think her management was a disaster, the same way, Taylor Swift had that whole thing with her old management. I mean, Beyonce had to basically fire her own father, didn't she?
I don't know. I don't pay much attention to Beyonce.
Yeah, there was something there. But I mean, remember when Beyonce was, not black enough, that period where it was the Beyonce Rihanna feud? And it was always, Rihanna's authentic, Cardi B's authentic, Beyonce's too much of a princess. Like, why do we do this? We don't do this. The bar to do this to men in positions of infamy, leadership, guys who have the ability to get stuff done. So many more. They get so many more passes. They get so much more benefit of the doubt when they do stuff, as long as it's strong, tough,
And it's so bizarre, because it's the attitudes of both sides nowadays completely miss what women have been historically.
Yeah.
Where it's like, we know I keep an eye on the red pill and their idiocy about women.
Yeah.
And this whole idea that, women are stupid and they're supposed to just do what the man tells them. That's never been historically accurate.
No.
And this idea that, yeah, my boyfriend stumbled on this video of Tate talking about how the Roman Empire fell because of women and transgenders and letting the barbarians and the foreigners into Rome. And it's like, my boyfriend has his bachelor.
He said
Yeah,
that?
yeah. So my boyfriend has his bachelor's in history.
Yeah.
So like, he doesn't care about most of this commentary shit. He lets me have my drama and occasionally listens when I need to talk about it.
The Roman Empire fell because they overextended and the supply chains fell apart.
Yeah. And
Right.
so but it's like, the nice thing was when he sent it, I'm like, okay, let's talk about historical context. And he's like, none of this
No,
is accurate.
no.
Like, the one person who we maybe know about possibly being transgender in the Roman Empire was one of the absolutely nuttiest emperors who would just stand outside naked looking for random men to have sex with.
Is he talking about the fact that Nero married a boy?
No.
Oh, okay. For people who don't know, Nero, after one of his wife died, basically castrated a boy who looked like his late wife and married him.
And the Roman emperors were all kind of terrible.
Well, there was, again, like you said, we don't know the pure facts of this stuff that could have been. There are some figures in antiquity that could have been, that we know they understood intersex people, because hermaphrodite is Hermes and Aphrodite. But they often gave them religious roles because a lot of them couldn't have children. And it in a culture that was very regimented regarding gender norms, something like that, you have to go, it's the gods, because otherwise it just throws your whole structure out of whack.
Yeah. And even beyond that, it's, we go back to even in I think it's the Tanakh that has the book of Proverbs.
Yeah.
Okay. I couldn't remember if it was that or the Talmud.
Yes. So even in Proverbs is scripture. Yeah.
Yeah. So even in the Tanakh and the Bible of Proverbs 31, of a woman who, a good wife, she makes sure her house is clothed. She makes sure they have food for the winter. She weaves cloth and she sells it on her own while her husband is in city hall meetings. She's buying a vineyard and making it profitable. And how does that mesh with this red pill idea of women are stupid and can't make decisions, and so they need to just listen to a man? No, it used to be, if a woman needed her husband to tell her to do everything, she wasn't a good wife, because she was supposed to help take things off his plate. She was supposed to run the house so he could deal with his business stuff. And it's just this, this is what traditional marriage. No, that was never traditional marriage.
Yeah.
And so they can reduce it to, women are only valuable if they're young and beautiful and fertile. No, that obviously beauty has always had a value. But it's like, even in Pride and Prejudice, you get Mr. Bennet, who's like, yeah, no, I married the pretty woman and she wasn't smart, and I should not have done that.
Well, it's also, I personally think that what we hold up as acceptable beauty standards is not what a lot of men actually like.
No.
And that doesn't mean it's bad if men like traditional. I don't think we should get rid of what's considered ideal now. I just think we should add to it. We should make it more inclusive, ironically. And instead of, trying to police everything and take things away, let's just add perspectives. And it just seems like these same stories keep getting told with the same, women, the queen or the princess or something, just keeps getting told over and over and over again with a different coat of paint, saying very little new.